Welcome to the April 23rd City Council work session. We have two items. The first one up is the redesignation of Strikers Field Park. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll just turn it over to Neil for a presentation and discussion from there.
Okay, so I'm not going to give a lot of detail here because back in September we kind of talked through this and provided some background about Stryker Field, which is a little over 8-acre park that's adjacent to a site that is owned by District 4J. They have plans for a school but don't know when they're going to develop it, and the idea for Stryker Field for a long time has been that it would be developed as a community park with lighted sports fields in conjunction with the adjacent school site, and the neighborhood group has brought an alternative idea to the table to redesignate it to a more passive use, what we would call a neighborhood park, so that it wouldn't have sports fields, that would have lights. And so what we've brought back to you are two options for how to consider that decision. The recommendation we've made is to roll that consideration into the update of our pros plan, which we've now begun the pre-planning for. It's a year ahead of where we told you last time we thought it would end up, so that's coming along a lot sooner. For us, the decision really comes down to how to make the best use of scarce resources, and when we know we're going to be doing a series of public meetings and outreach and council hearings and whatnot for the pros plan, if we roll Stryker Field into that, it means that we don't have any extra notice, hearings, meetings, and so forth. The other alternative would be to do it sooner through a kind of standalone process. I'm pretty much just going to stop there and entertain your questions, and if there's more background you want, just let me know.
Can I ask a question? Actually, the cue, George. So the neighbors want it to be used for different purpose than we currently have planned, right. But is there a way, do they want it to be done, is it time sensitive to them?
I mean, they've been talking about it for a couple of years now, and I think they're anxious to have it happen sooner rather than later. There's two parts to this. The designation is one part, but then actually having something get constructed there is another part. We don't have funding identified for either construction or maintenance of anything there right now. So, and I think that's mostly what they're anxious for, is to see some amenities in the park that fit with the vision that they have. So whether a quicker decision on redesignation would lead to a quicker result on the ground, I don't know. That depends on, looking at all the priorities across the park system. We have 7 or 8 undeveloped neighborhood parks that I consider in the queue in front of them that haven't been developed yet. So we'd have to look at, that whole picture.
The only other question I want to ask is, if their concern is that we might develop it for the current, under the current plan, before we can get to the larger discussion with the pros plan, is there a way that it would be possible for council to guarantee that nothing was going to be happening to it between now and when the pros plan is looked at?
Well, you could certainly direct us not to, but I can tell you there's no possible way that we can get to development of that park because the school district isn't ready to move. And the idea of a sports field or sports fields there doesn't make any sense without doing it in conjunction with the school district. So we wouldn't be moving on it until they move on it, and they're telling us they're not moving on it in the near future, so certainly not in the next year or two.
And I've got George Poley and George Brown in the queue.
I may need a second round.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the one that brought this forward based on the input from the Northeast Neighborhood Association. The reason, I think one of the major reasons why they want to move this forward as soon as possible, because recently in that area between Crescent and Colbert Road, there has been 1,100 units, not people, but 1,100 units either recently built, being built, or in the plans to be built in the future. And other than the one little neighborhood park inside the Crescent Meadows development, there are no community parks in that area, and there's going to be a large influx of people coming into the area. And the Northeast Neighborhood Association has made it very clear that they want another neighborhood park. In fact, they're willing to help out. They're willing to put some sweat equity into this to help either build it or even maintain it. They've got volunteers just chomping at the bit waiting to go. I recently had a discussion with one of the 4J school board members who was a major push behind getting this designated as a sports field many years ago, and he in fact told me that he's 100% behind changing it into a neighborhood park. As far as I know, the school is not, they don't have any plans to build for at least the next 20 years out there unless something major changes. So I think it's important that we move forward with this because there's not another area in town that's got as much open land as that area right now, but it's rapidly going away. And the more development going in with housing of either multiple family housing or single family housing, the more park space you're going to need. And we had a presentation here not too long ago with a picture of the map of the city with parks, and you could tell that the northeast part of the town is woefully short of developed parks. So it's not like some of the other areas where there's been property identified for a neighborhood park where acquisition has to be made. This is a piece of land that we have that is available to move into a community park. So I just think that it's important that we go ahead. I realize the financial strain that it might put on, but in looking at the AIS and the process we would have to go through, I think that if we waited until after the pros plan update in 2015, which we know can take a long time, I think my feeling is by that time we may have lost the opportunity to save this area and to convert it into a neighborhood park. And by starting it now, I think we could go ahead and convert it into a neighborhood park. And with the building going on and the SDCs collected, I think the funding is there to go ahead and build it, and then have the neighborhood association jump in and help.
George Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I don't know. I'm kind of puzzled by the sense of urgency here. I think it's kind of better to wait and just fold this into the reconsideration of the pros plan, because, you know, this is the first I've heard of the neighbors' reasoning behind this. We haven't really seen a comprehensive summation of all the discussions that you may have had with the neighbors, and so I have a better idea of their reasoning now, but none of that was clear in today's AIS, and so I feel that, I don't know how the other councilors feel, but I feel like we just don't really have a lot of the background for the reasoning for the redesignation. And I just know that playing field is getting hard to find. Playing field space. I've heard this from there's AYSO, and there's Kids Sports, and there's the Eugene Metro Football Club, and it's kind of getting hard to schedule events now with all the fields that are available. There's still a big need for for sports fields, and I'd kind of like to get more background on the neighbors' reasoning and concerns and their logic behind this, and then see a map too. And it just I don't know, it just seems to me like we're kind of jumping the gun, and it's true we don't know what the school what 4J's plans are, and I just feel like it might be better to have more information about in these areas that I mentioned before. Otherwise, I think it's best just to incorporate the redesignation during the update of the total plan and see what the whole picture is for the city and then the northeast neighbors, and the northern part of Eugene and see where all the parks are in relation to each other, and it may be that we might want to do that, but I just feel like we don't have enough information to put that on a separate track right now, personally. Thank you.
Claire? Yes, I can say Claire on the work session.
Just a work session.
I went,
Thank you, Mayor. So I had an opportunity to sit down with Craig and learn a little bit more of the context for the neighborhood's concerns, and I can understand what the thinking is there. But I also think that in terms of resource efficiency and just the idea, in my mind, of doing a separate process can be, I think, more challenging for the rest of the neighborhood and the wider community to engage. So I would be more in support of providing some reassurances to the neighborhood now that this is not going to be developed as a sports field anytime soon, and that consideration of a redesignation and an opportunity for neighbors to really engage in a robust process about what they'd like to see in a community park be part of the update of the pros plan. I think if that means passing a motion saying, we will hold in abeyance any development of this park as a sports field until after that process, I think that'd be fine. I know in my own ward where I've got undeveloped parks as well, there's Ferndale Park in particular, which I think is next on the list to get some development when we've got some funding. And in the meantime, there have been volunteers working in the park, and staff has supported those efforts as much as they're able, with the neighbors understanding that the amenities they're putting in are rather temporary and the city's not maintaining them. So there's been some negotiation and support there. So they have been able to actually utilize the park, even though it's still technically undeveloped, and make use of that space for their neighborhood in a positive way. It hasn't been a perfect process. I mean, there's still some challenges, but I think it is a model that could work with the Stryker Field piece while the process of formal redesignation happens. So it doesn't mean that no one can use the park as a park while we go through this process. It'd just be more informal than formal, and also knowing that we don't have the money ready even once we get through the pros plan. It'll probably still be a couple of years before that park gets some funded development through the city. So I'm more in support of folding this into the pros plan update, but would like to provide some reassurance to the neighbors that their vision, will be honored.
so I've got Mike and then Alan in the queue. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I, first of all, agree with everything that George said. And to that I would add, only the close-in university area of 2 and 3 and 4 years ago has seen more intense residential development than this area in the last year and what will happen in the next year. This is the most intense area of development in the community that I'm aware of, new residential units without any capacity for parks. The reason for the speed issue, to address what George's concern was, the reason for doing this now, is that while this area is being developed residentially, you have developers who have a mind to want to work together with the city and to want to work together to defray some of the potential costs that the city may face to help with development of this park and of this area. It's the designation, as I understand it, that's the problem with them doing so. So this puts it, essentially we're giving them permission to help, if they will, is my understanding. And one of the things that we've invested in is the SNAPS process in that area and in the Santa Clara area, of allowing neighbors to get more involved in the planning of their area and their neighborhood. And in the recent SNAPS process, they asked neighbors in this close-in area if they'd rather have a sports field or a neighborhood or community park. And by massive majority, it was that they would prefer a community and neighborhood park there. I think they had 640 respondents say they would like to see that developed as soon as possible because there are so few in that area. So my understanding is the essence of what we're doing with this is saying, yeah, we get that the old plan probably isn't what we want to do with that, and the new one now makes more sense. And while we have the opportunity to defray some of the costs to the city while it's being developed, we just want to change the designation so that possibility can take place.
Alan?
Yeah, I don't mind taking a look at the issue. I'm not sure if we should redesignate this or not. I understand others have made up their minds already. That's the way usually it happens around here. On the other hand, we do need additional sports fields. And I guess, Mike hit on the head, 1,100 units, that was in one complex in my ward. So I understand that pressure. But I really don't see the need to rush. I don't see, what we've been told is there's no plans for redevelopment of this in the next 5 years and maybe even 20 years with the school district. So I don't think that there's anything pressing except for the issue of what the developers want to do. But I don't see that as overriding. So I'm in favor of waiting and folding this into the pros plan update because I think it needs context about this decision in a broader context. I'm worried about a separate process and the cost and the staff time that it would take to do that. I think we have slotted times where we do these kind of updates on purpose because they're pretty extensive, and I think we should fold as many of those things as we can. And I'm not real fond of these one-off kind of things necessarily unless they're in a broader context. So I also like Claire's idea of a motion reassuring the neighborhood. That's a pretty good idea as well.
Betty?
Thank you. I have a question mainly. Is there a cost to just redesignating?
Well, the costs are basically staff and administrative costs. We would, the process we described, if we did a standalone process, we would hold a public meeting. We would do some survey work to supplement what the neighborhood has already done. We'd put together a recommendation. You've asked to have a public hearing, be part of the process. So it's mostly staff and admin costs for those processes. We're not talking hundreds of thousands. Honestly, the more difficult part of the resource question is the staff time. Since our staff are already programmed out, for the rest of the year with really more projects than we have capacity for. So figuring out how to shoehorn another project in this year would be harder than the funding part.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's going to take a lot of staff time?
Well, it depends on what a lot means.
It sounds sort of simple to me, just redesignate, but it's not, you're saying.
Yeah. The amount of time we spend doing a public notice, holding a meeting, doing surveys, compiling the results, preparing a report, holding a public hearing, it is substantial.
And you have to do a survey, is that right?
We've found that to be very, very effective, and that's a small amount of the time. It's more the public meetings and the compiling of the report and then staffing your public hearing and supporting your decision-making process.
Okay.
And I think part of that is just what doesn't get done in that interim period, and so the staff is working on this, and then there's other projects in the queue that then get delayed or postponed because we're now doing something else, and so that's part of what the cost is.
Okay, well, look, it seems to me the redesignation is a good idea, but I'm still listening. Thanks.
Chris?
Thank you. There's a couple of levels that I'm thinking on here. The first level is playing fields versus neighborhood park, and I understand the neighbors would really like for this to be a passive neighborhood park, and I get with the increase in units that's a real advantage there. Where are the other playing fields other than school fields? Are there other playing fields that are available to folks in that area?
We've got the Cal Young and Sheldon sports parks, which are owned by 4J,
4J.
but provide sports fields, and then
But they're usable.
Ascot Park is our one facility on the north side of town that has sports fields. So you have 3 different sites that have sports fields.
Yeah, in my experience, school districts and cities cooperate so much that when you have a sports field, it tends to kind of be universally community available. So I tend to kind of see that there's capacity there. So I'm not hearing a lot of opposition to this change in designation. And it seems like it makes sense. It satisfies the neighborhood. There are other options available. So I think, from the council's will, I think the will would be to do that. So then it falls to the question of, should we do it sooner or later? That then becomes a question of what is the risk potential versus the reward potential. The risk, from my standpoint, is the effort, the time, the money, the additional work that it would represent over and above doing it the way you're recommending, which is the pros opportunity. The potential reward, from what I'm hearing, though, is if you designate it sooner, there's an opportunity for somebody to help us develop that park and to create the development there. What typically would it cost the city to develop that, a neighborhood park of that size? Do you have any ballpark idea?
Well, full development, the last one we did was Creekside. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, no, I'm not remembering the figure. It's hundreds of thousands. It's actually probably in the neighborhood of $200,000 an acre.
That would probably jibe with, and I'm working off of, 5-year or 6-year-old figures, but that would seem to be probably in the ballpark, no pun intended. So we're thinking the potential reward is, if you designated it now, if you had somebody from some other area who was willing to step forward and say, I'll give you $200,000 or $300,000 to develop this park, that would be a tangible reward for doing it. But I don't know if there is a confirmed or a legitimate confirmation that we would have that. So I know on the risk side, it would cost us money. That's a given. There would be an additional cost. On the reward side, I don't know for sure if we'd have somebody who would step up with $200,000 or $300,000. It would be great if they did, but I don't know. And interest is not the same as opening your checkbook. So at this point, I hear the reward side of it, and I think that's a very compelling reward side of it. But if I had somebody who said, I have a guarantee of somebody who would walk in with $200,000 or $300,000, boy, I would definitely take that seriously. But I'm not hearing a risk of suddenly building sports fields there. So, as Claire says, I think we could reasonably reassure folks that there is no likelihood that there's going to be any sports fields built there. And that the reason we might take a little longer is to save the city and the taxpayers some money. I'd be willing to re-examine this if somebody walked forward and says, we've got a commitment for $300,000. But for right now, I'm inclined to say, let's go ahead and follow the staff recommendation. Not that I don't want to get there, but for me, the risk on the cost side would probably be the deciding factor.
Quick, real short response to part of your question. You started out talking about the sports fields versus neighborhood park.
Right.
One of the elements that was in the original AIS that wasn't in this briefer one today is that a standalone process, it wouldn't make sense to address the sports field side of the equation because that's a citywide regional question,
Yeah.
which belongs in the plan update process. So we would have to set aside, in other words, you would have to decide about this park, removing those sports fields here without knowing what the impact is for the
How they fit
system
into a larger context. Okay.
is.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I'd just like to follow up a little bit on Chris's comments and ask if you've had any proposals by developers for taking care of the cost of this park.
No, the conversation that I've had with Northeast Neighbors is the idea that they would put in a few very low-cost amenities, trails, benches, some trees, that kind of thing. Not that there's any interest in or anybody coming forward with, many hundreds of thousands for full development.
So I would say that from my point of view, if someone approached you and you with an offer and you evaluated that and thought it had enough legs under it to make it worth going at this separately, then you could choose to bring that back to council if that was the position that the staff felt was in our city's interest.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got George, Mike, Alan, and Claire in the queue. And then, yes, we're still on time.
I was just going to comment that as far as the volunteers, I don't think there's been any significant work done on that area yet. I think it's just some trails from people just going out there and walking. But like I said, there are the people that are interested in putting in the sweat equity. And, you know, we've taken on other topics, kind of pushed them ahead of other items at the drop of a hat. So taking this out of order or taking this on as a standalone, I don't think is out of the ordinary for this council, the way we do business. The biggest concern, I think, as I said earlier, is that the neighborhoods association, and you know, it's not just the neighborhood association, it's the people that live in that area and the people that are going to be moving into that area, want something more definite that they're going to be able to have a neighborhood park. And by pushing it off, starting the process for another year, in that process alone, we don't know how long that's going to take, but usually, a year or 2 years at the minimum. You know, there's a lot that can happen in that time, and I think we need to make certain that the people in that part of the city have a definite decision by us that this area will be designated a neighborhood park for their use. And I just think that it's a better way to go, starting the process now and standalone. And we don't have to invest the city's money in building a park right away. I just think that the designation part is the most important part, and I think that can be handled in a pretty quick and efficient manner, and I just think it needs to be done.
Rich Brown.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a question. On the second page of the EIS, under related city policies, the last paragraph says the PROS Comprehensive Plan 2005 also designates Stryker Fields Park as a community park. However, City Council's adoption of the PROS Comprehensive Plan was remanded by the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals, and it does not currently have policy status. So the this appeal, who was the intervener? And it's not been resolved? Is it still an active appeal?
It was remanded by LUBA, and we haven't taken action on remand. As a legislative action, we aren't required to take immediate action on remand, so that hasn't happened yet. So the PROS comp plan isn't in effect right now. It's why you wouldn't be, if you were to take immediate action, why you wouldn't be amending the PROS comp plan, because it's not in effect right now. You'd be amending the PROS project and priorities plan.
Was this appeal, who brought the appeal?
The Home Builders Association.
I see. Home Builders Association brought the appeal. Okay. All right. That answers both my questions. Thank you.
Mike?
George Pulling brings up a very good point, that oftentimes opportunities for the community to win aren't on our radar and aren't in the planning cycle. To talk about the Amazon headwaters is to talk about a potential purchase of parkland that isn't on anyone's radar, isn't on the planning lists anywhere, but the community is in favor of in that part of the community, and we want to be responsive to. This is a like circumstance. And to be more specific, it's not currently planned as a neighborhood or community park, so there isn't some of the discussion about what would the attributes of that park look like, because it's currently slated as ball fields. But one of the things living up there is that the way things have developed now, and by the way, the residential development is predominantly low income in those multi-unit complexes without any kind of recreation in the immediate area. But one of the things is that through that huge field, a path has developed where kids go across there on their bikes. Happens all the time. My kids have done it. Now, one of the things the neighborhood wants to do is develop that park and see that area a paved bike path across the park, because that's what it's currently used for, and it makes sense if you see where the schools are and where the kids live and what's going on. It's happening already. My understanding is the developer, one of them in the area adjacent to that, has offered to grade that and take care of it. Now we're talking about not writing a check, but we're talking about making the use of the facility the way we're going to want it and the way the neighbors want it, and for us to save significant amounts of money. Because my understanding, and I may be wrong about the specifics here, but my understanding is just the clearing, grading, and paving of that path is about $3 million. So the staff time, forgive me, against what we might save for getting help to do this, when the time is right, all we have to do is give them permission to do it, I think makes a lot more sense, much like the Amazon headwaters, as an opportunity that's presented to us that the neighbors want and that we should take advantage of.
Alan?
I just need to say that I don't think just grading and putting in a pavement path is $3 million. There's some expense to it for sure, but I'd be surprised if it's $3 million to grade and put in a paved path. So,
as I still have 38 seconds left, I appreciate that. As I said, I may not be right with the specific dollar amount for that part of the project alone, but I was in a recent meeting with the neighborhood leaders where we discussed the costs of the development of that park and that path being a part of it, and the discussion of how we might see that paid for by the developers that are a part of that with their efforts and with their work that would make it a significantly lower cost to the city. And whether it's a fraction of that money or how it works out specifically, forgive me for not being as precisely detailed, because that's not the business I'm in. But what I'm trying to get across is it's a significant amount of money and more than the staff time.
Alan?
So what is the actual delay in terms of time between these two options? Do you have a sense of that, Neil?
Well, you all will have a hand in that, because the length of the planning process for the comprehensive plan update, isn't entirely in our hands to control. But so we've estimated that a standalone process could be finished, by the end of 2014, by the end of this year. We haven't exactly figured out when it would start and stop, but in that framework, we're intending to begin work on the Parks Plan, comprehensive plan update very early in 2015. It may take a year, might take a year and a half, and then we would go into the adoption process that's related to the LUBA remand piece. So, it's hard to predict. It could be, as little as I don't know, a month, a year and a few months to get all the way through the process, or it could take 2 years, depending on what comes up and what you all want to do, in terms of public input and appeals and all, there's so many. As you know, with these processes, you never. It's hard to predict how long it'll take.
Okay.
So the difference could be a year and a half, or it could be longer.
Okay. And so we did this. Obviously, you're saying there's a significant amount of staff time that to do a standalone process. What would get bumped off the work plan? Because you're booked out.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what we're working on between now and the end of the year are rehabilitation projects, renovation projects of stuff that's broken and worn out in the park system. We've actually brought on additional staff to be able to get more of that work done, because we haven't been keeping up with it. There's just so much of it. As you may remember, a couple years ago, we gave you that kind of laundry list of the backlog of renovation needs was over $20 million. So we're working really hard with the funds we have to get through that. That's staff-intensive work. So very likely we'd have to pull somebody off of doing that renovation work of our existing infrastructure in order to do this process.
Okay. I kind of like the notion of what the mayor was alluding to, which is, so if someone did want to step up with a concrete proposal, so to speak, then we could easily bring this back up, and if we had a clearer picture of exactly what all those things were instead of speculation. And as well, I think a motion that of no development in the interim gives the neighborhood a lot of certainty as to what's going to happen in the short term over the next year or two, and I think that has value too.
Claire?
Thank you. So I think this is some good points on both sides of the question of when we take the action. Thinking about the fact that there are many new residents coming into the area, this year and into the year, it seems somewhat important to include them in the conversation about what would happen to this park. In terms of process, if we fold this into the pros plan, then part of the process would be deciding to redesignate and then deciding if the decision is, yes, the neighborhood definitely wants this redesignated, then part of the process would also be deciding what amenities that park would have. Is that correct, Neil?
At a general level. So the comp plan deals with mostly the category of park. And the old pros plan describes the typical facilities in each type of park. So we're talking about changing from a community park with sports fields to a neighborhood park without sports fields. We wouldn't do any kind of specific planning with the neighborhood at that stage about the design of the park, where the playground would be, where the paths would be. That's a much too detailed process to deal with at this
The comprehensive plan level.
system-wide discussion.
So if we took action to redesignate it now, before the comp plan update, when would that process of the neighborhood involvement in planning the actual park happen, would you guess?
Typically, the design process happens when we've identified the funding, it's gone through the CIP, it's come around to where that funding for that park is now available, and then we start the design process. These days, the additional factor is, do we have a maintenance funding strategy that covers this new park as well as everything else we have?
So that's a long time from now, in theory.
For full development of a neighborhood park, yes, it's a ways off because, as we mentioned, and Ferndale's a good example, there are, I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 neighborhood park sites that we've owned for years that haven't been developed yet, that are kind of in that queue, and those neighbors are waiting for their park development as well.
Right. So this is a question for the city attorney. Given that our official plan has been remanded, what is the binding legal designation of this park right now?
It is designated in the PRO's Project and Priorities Plan, which is an adopted plan. It was also appealed, but we were affirmed on appeal. It's a separate plan. It's our SDC 223 plan. It is designated as a sports field in that.
Community park.
So that would be what we'd be changing through a separate process.
So do we have any authority to hold that designation in abeyance? I'm just making up words now. I'm not an attorney. But to kind of lift the designation and keep it undesignated until we go into this process? Would that be?
Lifting the designation really is the amendment process. But, I mean, if that is the approach you're taking, there's other ways perhaps that you could have a motion, one being asking staff to come back to council if it becomes likely it would be designated or it would be developed as a sports field, or if it becomes financially feasible or money's available for the neighborhood park element. So the motion could be to ask staff to make sure they're coming back to you, because that would put the question then open again. Do you want to now pull it out of the update process?
And then the other question I had was, could we either in addition or instead make a motion to direct staff to work with the neighborhood and potentially developers in the meantime to support them in working informally in the park with temporary amenities while they wait for this planning process to happen.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
So I'm hearkening back to our discussion about the skate park, and it was one in which it was a little bit the opposite, where you directed staff to move it up in time, do it sooner than you were planning to do, and that kind of thing happens all the time. So you certainly could pass a motion, I think, and tell me if you agree, simply to delay implementation of a community park with sports fields until the completion of the comp plan update, which would be a very clear, it's not going to happen before then, and then you don't have to amend the plan. You're just directing us not to implement that particular thing for a period of time. So that's an option.
Yes, it doesn't change the designation or lift anything, so that would absolutely be fine.
Well, I would be inclined to make that motion, but I will let the queue play out.
Okay, Chris, you're next.
Thank you. An additional kind of risk and reward thought that has come to me is ever since I've been on council, we as a body, including staff, have wanted to, as much as we possibly could, be responsive to the community. It's what we strive for. When the community needs something, we want to be responsive to it. In addition to being transparent, I think it's one of the greatest goals we have is to be responsive to the public. And a couple of good examples have come up. The Headwaters and this park are all examples of us really trying to be responsive in a way that's different from the plans we had already set. How can we modify, change, adjust, and be flexible? And I think the community wants and expects us to do that. The trade-off then becomes every time you customize and become responsive, there's a cost to do that. And what for me is, I don't want to say we're not willing to be flexible or responsive because it's going to cost us money. That we wouldn't be a very good government if that's the way we were. On the other hand, I need to consider how many times can you be responsive before it starts costing you a lot of money. So what I have to do is I have to judge each time we're being responsive to what it's going to involve to do that. What's the payoff for being responsive? In this case, I could be persuaded either way. Because I like the idea of saying we as a city are responsive to the desires of the neighbors, and we can go off the general script and do that. But what I don't want to do is to create a situation where we say every time somebody wants us to go off script and change the system, we can do it as a whole series of one-ups, because the cost would become very prohibitive. We'd be customizing everything we do, and there's an attendant cost. So I could do this, but I have to do it with this constant thought that every time we go out of order with whatever it is we're talking about doing, and John brings this up all the time, you're consciously saying we're going out of order, there's going to be a cost, and we're going to accept that cost with our eyes open. So if I'm willing to support this, I'm going to be willing to support it knowing, because you've advised us, that your responsiveness costs the city money. So when we get to budget time, don't complain about how we're not working well, because being responsive costs money and costs taxpayer money, but it's, I think, what the taxpayers are expecting us to do. So I'm talking circularly, but the whole reason for that is to say I'm going into this with my eyes open, knowing that if I go down this road, it's going to cost us money and it's going to take time away from something else. But we as the policy body are consciously saying I'm willing to do that in this case. But I may not be willing to do it in every case, because we can't afford to do it in every case, and we have to be able to draw lines where they need to be drawn. So I think I could do it as long as we can try to keep that customized cost down and not say we're going to be doing it all the time.
So we're at, I've got you in the queue, Mike, but I'm going to tell people that we're just about out of time for this discussion. And the question for me about this is not wanting to be responsive to the neighborhoods. I think here around the table, everybody wants to be responsive. But it is being responsive to the different issues that need to be thoroughly vetted before making such a decision, and that happens within the PROS process. So you can support the the neighborhood, you can support the broader community's ability to have input, and you can prevent anything from happening there until you have that discussion within the PROS process. All of that is possible if you choose to do it. I'm going to ask Chris right now to put the motion on the table, and you guys can put whatever else you want in as we go through, because we need to move here.
So put the motion that's here, and then we can
Yep.
mess with it, okay?
Yep.
I move to direct staff to incorporate redesignation of Stryker Fields Park into the update of the PROS Comprehensive Plan beginning in 2015, and to include a public hearing before the City Council.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mike, you're first, and then George.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to substitute to direct staff to initiate a public process, including a public hearing before the council to consider redesignation of Stryker Field Park in 2014, and I'll speak to that if I get a second.
Second.
And seconded.
I have 3 minutes now? Okay, thank you. One of the great examples of different parts of our community working together to be responsive happened in 2011 when Alan and I, both sensing a need in our particular parts of town, worked together in a budget process to find monies to develop Creekside Park in North Eugene and to help with work that needed to be done in Hendricks Park in his ward. In doing so, everybody working together, we were able to accomplish something where Creekside Park was designated to become a neighborhood park, but years and years and years in the future, based on our process. This is a similar circumstance where we have a massive need and we have a budget problem, but we have people willing to help. And the only thing in our way is the staff process. It's my understanding that the vast majority of people in that area are interested in seeing the redesignation happen for the reasons that have been discussed. My understanding as well is that the public process can consist of a hearing. We don't have to do the process in such a large scale that it has massive cost to it, but we're then foregoing an opportunity to save significant amount of money by working with the folks developing that area. I apologize. Now, I didn't hear an answer to Claire's question when she asked very directly if it's possible to give permission for the developers to begin work now, regardless of what we do. Can they work on the area and begin to develop it regardless of whether we redesignate it or not?
Yeah, the tricky thing is that we operate under the policy framework that you've adopted, and right now that policy framework says build sports fields that are lighted. So if we approve something that interferes with that, we're basically going against an adopted policy. If we approve something that's of a very minor, temporary, easy to remove nature, like a soft surface trail and a bench and a tree, that's not a big deal. If we were to approve completely developing the park as a neighborhood park, that would be very much in contrast to the approved policy structure for this site. The other thing that's a consideration for us is what I call the tail wagging the dog problem. Sometimes you can put in a temporary something in a park and people become so attached to it that you can't really design the rest of the park. You have to design around that one thing, and often that becomes less efficient and makes for a less effective overall park. So we have to weigh those things in as park planners and designers.
So I'm hearing you say, no, really, they can't.
Depends.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah,
Depends what it is.
yeah, Alan's right. It's one of those. It depends.
Either way, that kind of makes my point. That the answer to your question, Claire, is no, they probably can't. And the problem here is what the community loses, what the neighbors lose, and what we lose in the savings. And what they will have to do then in order to become part of this process is to wait likely 5, 6, 7 years into the future before they ever see that developed, where they could see some of that done now. So with our merely saying it's okay to help. And I would urge my colleagues to consider saying it's okay.
Mayor, can I just clarify a little bit also with that? I don't want to leave the expectation that if it is redesignated as a neighborhood park, which is your choice, that the neighborhood can choose to put in whatever they want to put in. So part of the redesignation is not a design of the park. And so we will have concerns of anything that goes in there that actually isn't in complements what would be through a regular design process. And so if we go through the design process and the neighborhoods then want to and choose to put in some of that, that could be a savings to the city in that respect. So I just don't want to leave the expectation that in any case, whatever you choose to do, that it just is an automatic okay to essentially put in whatever somebody wants to pay for.
And I don't think that the neighborhood association was going to just go out there and willy-nilly build stuff. They are more than willing to work with the city to meet certain expectations as far as their time and materials and effort into this. So it's not, I'm sure they will, work very closely. They're willing to do that, and they said they would step up. And I'll pass on the rest of the time.
Okay.
Yes, speaking to the substitute motion, I'll be really brief. We hear, and I certainly believe it, that there's being 1,100 units being built right now, and that's just like one or two developments. And so I think we should keep in mind that those are going to be new residents. Once that gets tenanted, we don't know who's going to be in there. They might be a lot of people with kids. They might be a lot of people with kids that want to be on sports teams. They might want one or two. Some of these new, a lot of these new residents might want a one or two sports fields at Stryker Park. So, because they're going to be part of the neighborhood too. And I just think to move this separate piece ahead without, I just honestly don't see the urgency here. So I probably won't support this substitute motion. Thank you.
Ready to vote on the substitute motion? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4. I vote in opposition. It does not pass. So now we're back to the main motion. All those in favor? Yes?
Could Claire's motion be added in
That
as
was
a
over to you to
friendly?
speak to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, we just have one motion.
Yeah, so what I had written up, and it might be different with the main motion, but I had written up, I move to delay the implementation of the development of Stryker Field as a community park with sports field infrastructure until the completion of the PRO's comprehensive plan update, recognizing the neighborhood association has requested the park to be redesignated as a neighborhood park. In addition, staff is encouraged to work with the neighborhood and others wishing to provide temporary amenities to be maintained by park volunteers.
Second.
It's the same motion.
No, I was
Could be added.
suggesting.
I was
Second.
just suggesting it be
Well,
added.
I want to stop for a minute and say, we have a main motion
Okay.
on the table.
So-
So you could vote on the main motion and then do this as a
Okay.
second
Good.
motion.
Could this be an amendment?
That's how I was framing it, was to amend the
It could be
main
either
motion.
way.
I'll second the amendment.
Does it matter in terms of the substance?
I mean, if you're moving to amend it to tack that all on to the motion, you could move just to substitute that whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I offer that as a substitute motion.
And a second? Second?
Does that, point of order, does that take into account the idea of the, making sure it folds appropriately into the work for the next comp plan stuff?
If I understand, Claire, your motion is as though it is added on to the last words, the city council.
Substitute, it's in addition.
It's in addition to, the
Yes, I
whole
second
thing
that.
would be the addition to. Yeah.
This
Would
plus
have
what Claire
the
said.
Yes.
motion that's in our packet and then the
it's
rest of
amended.
that language.
Okay. And you second? All right. Further discussion?
Could you read it one more
Sure,
time?
so the whole motion would read, move to direct staff to incorporate redesignation of Stryker Fields Park into the update of the PRO's comprehensive plan beginning in 2015 and to include a public hearing before the city council, and to delay the implementation of the development of Stryker Field as a community park with sports field infrastructure until the completion of the PRO's plan update, recognizing the neighborhood association has requested the park to be redesignated as a neighborhood park. In addition, staff is encouraged to work with the neighborhood and others wishing to provide temporary amenities to be maintained by park volunteers. Might maybe just say in the meantime.
Rich?
I'm fine with it. It just sounds like a substitute motion because
All right.
it pretty much
Substitute
incorporates.
amendments.
Everybody ready? Okay. All right. So we're ready to vote on that? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. None in opposition. It passes. Thank you.
So now you need to,
Motion.
now you
Now
need to
we're
vote on the
main
motion.
All those in favor of the main motion as amended? 8 in favor and none in opposition. It passes. Thank you. So now we're going to, anything else, City Manager, on this
Not on
one?
this particular one, thank you.
Okay. So we're ready to go on the on-site management for multi-unit rental housing?
Thank you, Mayor. And Michael Wistel provide the presentation.
We've lost some members.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm here today to revisit the Council's past conversations related to on-site management for multi-unit housing. I will summarize our past conversations and then discuss implementation of new strategies in addition to ongoing strategies related to multi-unit developments and issues regarding nuisance behaviors. This topic is part of an ongoing conversation about mitigating the impact of larger multifamily developments and neighborhood livability, especially within the context of Envision Eugene, through the work of the neighborhood livability groups and past conversations related to MUPD. The Capstone development highlighted the issue and related concerns. As part of the approval of the MUPD for the project, Capstone was required to include on-site management functions, including maintaining a management office staffed on-site, having at least one employee residing on site, courtesy managers making nightly property inspections, and informing residents about good neighbor practices. As a result of this discussion, direction was given to staff to return with a mechanism for on-site management. This conversation was also taking place during the deliberations regarding the social host ordinance. In response to that directive, staff started out focusing on the language that was adopted for Capstone, but soon realized that a one-size approach may not be adequate and doesn't address the diversity of issues and possibilities that they found. So we dug a little deeper and researched the problem and what our response might be. We looked first to see what was happening locally and then at other projects in other communities. In Eugene, as elsewhere, multi-unit properties encompass a wide range of housing choices. Our neighborhood analysis indicates that these are scattered all over the community. Most of the discussion has been on student housing, but in fact, multi-unit properties include rental properties, ownership properties such as condos, student housing, senior housing, affordable housing, mixed ages and income, which is surprisingly common, and a wide range of sizes, anything over 3 units. And perhaps unsurprisingly, throughout this diverse field of living arrangements, management of these properties varies. Some have on-site management, some have live-in management, and a variety of other rules and regulations exist related to tenant behavior. In the previous conversation, staff presented the results from an informal survey of different communities. This survey highlighted a number of strategies and similar concerns related to multi-unit impacts. While questions were focused on student housing, responses reflected wide-reaching approaches to multi-unit development. As one would expect, various strategies are employed in combination throughout different communities. Some of the methods employed by the surveyed communities include the following: ordinances that require a local agent, as in someone who is hired to act on behalf of the owner and lives locally and can respond very quickly in the event of an emergency. Many universities provide a good neighbor guide, much like the one offered by the University of Oregon, which highlights student responsibility, conduct, and applicable laws and policies. Many communities have a rental permitting program and/or the ability to rescind rental privileges of a property in the event of repeat offenses. Many communities have enacted strict noise ordinances. Outreach and education for landlords, some more comprehensive than others, but sometimes paired with information on federal fair housing law, local laws, and safety practices. And here's what we've learned. First of all, we're not alone. Many communities are strategizing around these same issues. There are a variety of approaches in different communities, mostly focused on town and gown issues. We discovered new ideas, such as the local agent requirement or the requirement for proactive training through the police. Our police do something similar, but there's variances in how extensive that approach is. We've learned that management is critical, but not necessarily live-in management, depending upon how it's done. Response to complaints is also critical. Often the person who complains is a tenant within the building. Sometimes there is retaliation or perceived that there will be retaliation for complaints. Sometimes the on-site manager is reluctant to call, especially if he or she lives within the same building. We found no one-size-fits-all, especially given the problems with smaller properties. Smaller properties may be more prone to a number of problems in terms of enforcement, but larger properties have different issues in terms of neighborhood impact. And similar to that, there's no perfect template. We are continuing to learn from these communities, and we already have several components in place. Our approach will need to include a variety of strategies to get at these issues of compatibility and positive outcomes. Since that last discussion, there have been a number of developments related to multi-unit issues, both new and ongoing. I also included a version of this map on the last page of the packet if it's difficult to see. But looking at multi-unit densities in Eugene, one finds that most of our multi-unit density is along our main corridors and nodes and surrounding the university area. Recently completed projects added 591 units in Eugene. Those are in the yellow. While there are currently 1,229 units that have been permitted and are either under construction or planned for construction, many of which are student housing projects. While the on-site management requirements of Capstone provide a basis for this discussion, there are a number of ongoing programs that the city employs to address the issues of behavioral and safety concerns associated with multi-unit developments. These local measures work in either responsive or proactive capacity to help mitigate some of these concerns. These include the unruly gathering ordinance, building security plans, rental property program, and the SEPTED. The unruly gathering ordinance, also known as the social host ordinance, was under council consideration the last time staff presented on on-site management. It has recently celebrated its one-year anniversary, presumably quietly. The ordinance holds individuals criminally responsible for hosting or allowing an unruly event or social gathering. The property owners will also be penalized if there are multiple occurrences at the same property. In its first year, there have been 25 citations issued. 24 of these citations have been issued between 11th and 24th east of High Street, with the remaining one near 28th and Chambers. There have been no repeat offenders throughout the first year of the ordinance, and while it's not necessarily a scientific sample, that's an encouraging sign. A proactive measure of the Eugene Police Department includes the agreement to develop a security plan with multi-unit development managers to create mutually agreed upon policies to cover potential behavior on the part of residents, to outline the potential threats and solutions to maximize the security of the property. The EPD's existing security plan with Capstone sets guidelines for property control, theft reduction, security cameras, education and outreach related to existing laws, and reporting of crimes and complaints. It also includes an evaluation of the crime prevention specialist for environmental design considerations. And by all accounts, this has been successful thus far, offering another example of a model that is working locally. An ongoing service offered by the city is the Eugene Police Department's rental property program. The rental property program was developed in 2001 to assist managers of rental properties with problem tenants heighten awareness of activity on or around their properties, reduce calls for service to certain locations, and build stronger relationships between law enforcement and the rental community. It alerts property owners to incidents at their property that formerly would have gone unnoticed. There are currently 325 property managers and owners signed up for the program, covering approximately 2,000 addresses. It disseminates approximately 500 emails per month to the participants, and that's for all call for services, with the exception of combined or combination calls where fire and EMS was included. Another ongoing proactive measure includes the Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, or CPTED, which studies ways to design physical spaces to reduce undesirable behavior and crime. These are an audit performed by an EPD crime prevention specialist for property owners and managers, but also businesses, residents, and institutions. The three main areas of focus include natural surveillance, how well one can see what's going on in the environment without having to take an extra step. Natural access control, which is how easily intruders can get in and out of the property uncontrolled or undetected. And territorial behavior, how the environment reinforces a sense of who's in control. We will continue to research and refine our efforts just as other communities are doing, and also continue to work with our neighborhood partners in EPD. Based on today's council discussion and further direction, we will bring this issue back to council as part of a coordinated strategy. While we consider this an ongoing conversation, there are some questions we feel should be considered by council to further this discussion. And these include what exactly we are looking to address. Addressing behavior is a primary element of the measures we've discussed today and in the past. Are there other areas of interest such as habitability standards, design, neighborhood impact, parking, or others that should attract attention? Is there a particular strategy or focus in addition to what has already been done, perhaps the local agent, rental licensing, increased outreach, or something that we found in another community that council will direct us to investigate further? Should we consider size recommendations based on the size of properties? We have experienced problems and strategies for fewer and for more developed units. One size does not necessarily fit all. Explore potential unintended consequences, something that works for students but not seniors, for example, or does something create increased housing costs? And further investigate partners and stakeholders. Who can we coordinate with, and are we coordinating with the right folks? And with that, I'd like to open it up for discussion.
Greg?
Mentioning stakeholders specifically, since we have these units that are coming online that are mostly, in terms of demographics, student-oriented housing, and the University of Oregon's public safety unit is morphed into a police unit, what is the role of that police unit in terms of, I know that they have a jurisdictional geographic kind of designation around the university, but mostly it's going to be their students who may or may not be involved in these kinds of activities, which are not on campus but are close enough to campus. And what's that interface with the Eugene Police Department? Because I just see that there's some issues that could arise based upon the geographic and demographic designations of these units and how these units are policed and serviced, and the other concerns about current and additional costs to the Eugene Police Department for dealing with these kinds of potential disturbances from student-oriented developments.
I'd be happy to follow up on that question.
Because I would really like to know what our roles are between, the two jurisdictions, and specifically what we can do to better work together to manage these kinds of situations, particularly the ordinance that we passed last year about unruly gatherings at house parties, etc.
And I think what is implied in some of your question is not only what we can do together, but how we can share the burden, so to speak.
Exactly. The cost. Yes.
I get that. Okay, Alan.
Well, to answer your question probably more directly, the jurisdiction that the U of O PD has is campus only, and they don't tend to do things off campus. I've asked for and had discussions with the chief about the ability of them to, in the surrounding areas, be able to deal with other kinds of things, but that's not what occurs now. So if there's a party that, or an unruly complex that occurs outside the campus, then it's EPD.
However, they do have that ability to go off campus.
They could,
By the
yes,
state.
they could, with different kinds of agreements and things like that, yeah, because they are official of police department. I think it's real important to remember where this came from. This was responsiveness to neighborhood concerns, especially the neighborhood livability working group, which was put together and came up with a report, but many things in that about a multi-pronged approach about how to deal with the livability issues and the decreasing livability issues around the campus area in particular. And it was that multi-pronged approach, one of which was this thing. It came up before, and it's been a long-standing conversation before Capstone. Capstone was a community to talk about it because it was so a big issue. And we didn't need to deal with it with Capstone because they put it into their MUFTI agreement that they would have on site for the extent of the full 10 years of the MUFTI. The question then became, well, what happens after the MUFTI? There's no requirement after that 10 years, and what would happen after that? And that for that particular complex, but other campuses, other areas, it's still a problem. The problem still persists. Loud, unruly parties, and in particular complexes, noise, impacts on the neighborhood livability, and the decreasing livability in that area. As I've said many times, there are people that live near these complexes that actually are moving out because of it. While the social host ordinance helped tremendously, it didn't solve the problem. And that the multi-pronged approach that the Livability Consortium had a lot of different things in it, including a lot of things that Michael was talking about, but this was one of them. And I guess, and then when we look at, where the problems are and where the multifamily large units, I think we're talking about very large units in the, 30, 40 and up kind of units. One of the things I heard from many people in the areas around campus is that it's night and day between the difference between complexes that have on-site management and those that do not, in terms of how those complexes are perceived and how they behave. And also, interesting enough, the students kind of figured out too, the vacancy rates in the unmanaged ones are higher, much higher than the ones that are managed, because they figure out that it's not a pleasant place to live. I guess one of the questions I had about is whether or not, if we did have a rule about this, if it can be geographically constrained as opposed to having it be just completely citywide.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can get you that answer.
Yeah, that might be one of the questions I'd have. And then one of the other issues around this is size, and I think that there are some that are too small, so we want to figure out where that is. I think it's rather large apartment complexes are what we're talking about. Probably geographically constrained is where I would like to see us go.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Matt. I think this is good work to look at. I agree with a great deal of what Alan said. And when we're dealing with unruly parties, which is essentially what this is about, our ordinance has done a decent job, and looking at this is a good thing to do. But from my perspective, we're still not doing what I think would be the most effective thing to do. We're saying those making money providing housing to students should take some of the responsibility for making sure their behavior is what we want it to be. That's good, that's fine. But what we're not doing is talking about the students. Now, certainly, when the police respond, they're not always just U of O students involved in these kind of events. There's lots of folks, other young people. But oftentimes, the great majority are U of O students. I was one too. I remember what happens there at those times. one of the things that isn't in place is a connection between an EPD response to an incident with a U of O student and the interaction with the U of O student conduct code. We need a better partnership with the University of Oregon to make sure that students who've conducted themselves in a way to ask for our police department to come and respond as a result have a responsibility to their conduct code at the University of Oregon. I think making sure they know there are consequences to their student status is an effective way to keep them within a bounds of effective civil behavior. And I'd really like to see us taking that step more effectively with the university.
So I've got George Poling and George Brown in the queue, but I would like to say in here that I know that they've been working, and I don't know what the current status is. I don't know if you know what the current status is with the student conduct code, but I know they've been working on just what you're talking about, and so it has been in conversation. I know Robin has been working on that, and they're more open and amenable to that than they have ever been before. So maybe
Oh, that's true, and I don't know what the current status is, but we'll
update on that.
we will give you an update on what that is.
Great. George Poling.
Well, actually, Mike covered what I was going to say. You know, to this point, I don't think that the city has been given information as to the students that are involved in these type of negative actions, what kind of accountability they're held to. And, you know, the major problem is the behavior. And you know, granted, the university does a lot for our community, and, you know, without it, I don't think we'd be as good a place as we are, but still, you know, the entire time I've been on the council, I have never heard the university step up and say, as a result of these actions on this date, X amount of students have been held accountable by this, whatever the punishment, if you want to call it, that is. And that's what we need. We need the university to step up, like Mike said, and start holding these students that are involved in this type of activity accountable for their actions.
George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I think we all need to kind of go back. Ellen was spot on. The original concern was not with students. That's not what we were talking about when this issue came forward. We were specifically talking about the management of large complexes, not the behavior of the occupants. It arose during the capstone discussions about awarding them the MUPD. The concern was, while Capstone owns the property and manages the property, there are probably other builders of student housing that do the same thing. When they sell the property, they no longer manage the property, and so they turn it over to the new owners. And by the way, the tax exemption transfers to the new owners too. That's where the problem comes in. The new management company, the standards dropped precipitously. I represented all this during the update conversations. It's not new information. And that's when the problems come. Usually in the maintenance slides, buildings deteriorate, and they do not manage the occupants like Capstone originally did. So there's a deterioration in management. So I think we're not really talking about so much wild parties and stuff. That wasn't why this came forward. We kind of addressed that with the social host ordinance. This was more a concern of management standards, especially for large student complexes like this. So I'd be interested to know, I mean, you mentioned it, but there was no background information, Michael, about what other cities, I'm sure other places have grappled with this, because these are, it's like these companies do this all over the United States, and I'm sure it's the same problems. But specifically more, if we could get more information regarding management standards of places like this. I know that, Capstone, they were here before. They built University Commons in the north part of town, over near Kensrow, sold it, didn't manage it anymore. It became one of the most frequently visited places by the Eugene police. and was so for several years. The management deteriorated pretty rapidly. So I believe that was the initial concern for this. And how can we transfer standards that start off high when the property is sold? How are those standards in performance maintained on the part of management, not so much the residents?
Thank you, George. Claire?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the conversation. I particularly appreciate the last points Council Brown brought up, because I do think the conversation's a little more expansive than just student housing and behaviors. I know in my ward there's been some challenges with some apartment complexes and tenants within those complexes allegedly engaging in drug dealing and other similar activities that have a huge impact on other tenants and surrounding neighbors. And because we have this challenge with our public safety system, those folks might get arrested and booked, but they don't get charged and they get out again. And I'm not sure how much power or interest the landlords have to get those tenants out. I know some landlords try hard to get those people out of their buildings, but they may not have a lot of capacity to do that. So I think in addition to the maintenance of the property itself, we're also wanting to kind of pay attention to these other behaviors that may have nothing to do with student activities, but have similar impacts on the neighborhood. So I'm not sure that limiting it geographically or even to the size of the complex in terms of whatever kind of mechanisms we might look at would get us at those issues. I was intrigued by some of what you found in other communities of incentive programs for property owners who are maintaining their property and have tenants who are good neighbors within their units. I'm not sure how that would look for our community, but I'd like to learn more about what those kinds of programs are and how they're administered. The no code violations or excessive calls for law enforcement could be a standard that could apply no matter what the size of the housing unit. So those are some of my thoughts right now.
On your local measures like the security plan, and you said that there's been, the report is good, but I don't see a report, so I'm just asking for more information and really, I think, data on how all the strategies are working, and so that we can look at what they do over time. We may add to those, but I think we want sort of real time, what is really happening, is this working, is this not working over time, and to be able to watch it over the years so that we can really know what we're talking about and have real information.
Yeah, some of that came through conversation with Chief Kearns and other people in the police department, so I didn't have hardcore data.
It's much better for us when we're talking to the community to be able to actually demonstrate with real accurate information over time how all these things are working and whether they're worth the time and investment or not. Okay. I've got Alan in round two.
Yeah, I agree that it's not just students. We shouldn't say that. And Mike, you said it exactly right. When a lot of these unruly gatherings have way more than just students at them, they're bigger than that. And there's also multiple units around the city that has similar kind of problems. Of course, my focus is in that area. I feel it, I live it, I hear about it all the time. So that's where I come from. But it was this was part of the code of student conduct was also big discussion in the neighborhood livability group as part of their multi-pronged approach to dealing with the livability issues in that area. In fact, the chair of that at the U of O is actually one of the very active neighbors in the South University Neighborhood Association, and I would characterize it as there have been discussions but no movement, and there is no plan that I know of to make any changes. And this goes way back to, if you recall, the riots that that occurred, and there was absolutely nothing the U of O did in reaction to that, or could do under the Student Code of Conduct. It was kind of like the giant divorce between what happens off campus and what happens on campus, which a lot of us think is inappropriate. So I totally agree that we need to work on that and move that along, but it takes two to tango on that. It's also management standards and of the large complexes. So when we talked about it in the context of Capstone, a very large complex, and since there's been multitude of those been built since then, other communities have actually put in minimal standards in place to make sure that not only the behavior but also the maintenance, the safety of those places is dealt with. Our rental housing code actually in part deals with those issues around safety and health, but they also, my experience is in living in that area, complexes that have on-site management as opposed to ones that don't have on-site management and absentee landlords, issues get dealt with, they're better managed, they look better, their appearance is better, they have less problems with them. And I think what I would like to see us do is actually bring back a matrix of issues that we can go kind of issue by issue and decide how we want to deal with it, like size, like whether or not it needs, what does on-site management mean? Does it have to be, maybe as it gets bigger, it means that it has to be there and live there versus other kinds of issues. So I'd like to see us bring back something that actually just walks us through those things so that we can talk about them, including geographic. I know that some people may not want to do that, but we might still want to look at that.
I feel like I want to just say, out of fairness, because I know they have been working on it, that I just ask you to let us get a report from the university about the work that they've been doing, because I know that they have notified me, at least, that they had a different and a more positive response to using the student conduct code to trying to help out the neighborhood. So just ask you to be patient on that one and let us get the information. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with you on that. I know that for years and years and years, for a very long time, a university had a duty to act what they call in loco parente. They had the job to act as parents to those students. And in the, a few decades ago, the universities, by and large, stopped operating under such a procedure and such a mindset. I know too, because I've spoken with Karen, I've spoken with a lot of, I've spoken with a lot of the folks over there, and I understand with Greg and all that they're working very hard on that issue, and I appreciate that, and I certainly want to say that I would like to work with them on that. But for me, that's a very central part of the issue, is making sure that students are accountable for their behavior. And while we have little problem, it seems, as a council, insisting on the behavior of employers or insisting on the behavior of developers, I think that we should, because it's equally important, insist on how student behavior is dealt with by the university.
That's why I think the data is so important for us to have, because at least the brief journey we had in it today is, it seems like some of the things we are trying are working and really changing behavior, and that's a good story and a good result of the work you guys have done. So I think that's why it's important for us to really be able to have a thoroughly data-based information to come from. Anything else from anybody? Great. Oh, great.
Yeah, I'd like to also point out that Lane has a residential unit right across the street, and there's student conduct issues around that, as well as with 4J and the high schools / middle schools, because oftentimes we get this kind of situation where there's, as someone mentioned earlier, there's multiple players in these kinds of situations, and some of them get cited for MIP, others are at other institutions. Some of those students are dual enrolled at the university as well as the community college, and so I think that the discussion needs to be a little bit broader within the context of the entire student population in the community, as well as residents who are not involved or not part of that student population directly.
That's a good point. I don't know exactly how you get at that, but I do think one of the things you hear from students is that so many of them say we're doing a good job and we're being good members of the community, but we're getting all painted as being a big problem here. So I think what you're pointing out is that there are really a lot of good players, but there's a few that aren't and need to change their behavior, and they aren't just at the University of Oregon, they are at Lane Community College or in other parts of the community as well, and to find a way to sort of even out the finger pointing to the behavior that we want to stop as opposed to the institution.
It's the 99 in 1 rule.
Yes, right.
99% are fine.
Thank you, everybody.